Hi guitarlings, this is Gray at Hub Guitar. Today we're going to do a classical etude originally written for students of the violin. This is from a book of etudes written by a German guy called Kreutzer. This is etude number 2 that shows up in the book, and we're going to play it on the guitar so that we can build our picking speed and accuracy. So I originally intended this lesson to be a way for guitar players who use the pick to develop more speed and accuracy by studying a classical etude. However, you could also, if you're a classical player or you play only with your fingers, you could play this with an alternating finger pattern of the picking hand. So you could alternate between your index and middle fingers, and you could practice your rest stroke or your free stroke that way. But I'm going to focus on playing it on a steel string guitar with a pick. So let's begin. We're going to open it up with this phrase at the 5th fret. Notice that that's going to repeat a couple times. And you're going to do strictly alternate picking there. Down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. And in general, by default, you want to use alternate picking for this whole tune. Notice that I'm actually going to do a semi-bar with my index finger on the 5th fret, and that's going to allow me to quickly return to any notes that I need to play on the 5th fret without moving my index finger back and forth. I can just hold them all down like this. So here's the first couple measures. Notice that there's a stretch note on the 9th fret of the 4th string, and you've got to use your pinky to stretch for that. Now, if you subtract 5 from just about any note, you can get the fret number that you need to play it on an alternate string, a higher string. So that's either 9th fret of the 4th string or 4th fret of the 3rd string. And in general, whenever you find that there's some awkward stretch or something uncomfortable, I think it's a great idea to try the alternate way. And a simple way to visualize that is just remembering that if you've got a note on a string, you can usually subtract 5 to move it to a higher string, which is to a thinner string, or you can add 5 to move it to a lower string. That is, of course, unless it's going to cross over the B string. To cross over to the B string, you only need to add 4. And to come off of the B string to the 3rd string, you only need to subtract 4, because the B string is only tuned 4 half steps apart from the G string. So whenever you encounter some difficulty with a stretched note, consider the alternatives and decide if that's going to be better or worse. Coming up to measure 3, we're going to change our picking pattern slightly. Now this is optional. You could actually tackle the entire tune strictly using alternate picking, or strictly down picking or up picking for that matter. But if you're struggling with the concept of different picking patterns and that's confusing you, maybe you want to just try it with pure alternate picking, because you can play the tune that way. But I have suggested some alternate picking patterns. So for measure 3, since we're going to higher and higher strings, we can actually use a continuous motion of the pick to play all of those notes. So in other words, it's kind of like we're going to travel more distance if we're going down and then up and then down, instead of just going down, 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 right? That's a shorter path to get to those 3 notes. So that's an alternate way to do that. Down, 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 and then you come back up. And that repeats. So here's measure 3 going into measure 4. Notice that I just switched back to basic alternate picking there at the second half of measure 4. Coming up to measure 5, we're going to take that same picking pattern again. I like to roll my 3rd finger to get these 2 7th fret notes. In general, if I have 2 notes that are happening on 2 different strings but the same fret, I like to try to roll a finger onto it. That's a little bit easier than doing this. So here's measure 5 going to measure 6. Leaping over to that note. So watch out for that leap. Measure 7. So at the second half of measure 9, we're going to turn around our picking pattern, and that's because we've got a new pattern where we have a note on a higher string jumping down to a note on the lower string. And I think you'll find if you try to do that with standard alternate picking, where you go down and then up, that kind of multiplies the potential for error. It's kind of difficult. So if you flip the pattern around, instead you go up, down, I think you'll find that's more suitable to this phrase. And we continue that for measure 10. Notice that I've got a position shift here to the 2nd fret, and I ended up with my index finger on the 4th fret of the 3rd string. So now to make this position shift more comfortable, I've got to strategically plan which finger I use to play the next note. So I might do my pinky there. So if I force my pinky to play that note, suddenly I can lift up my other fingers and easily play the rest of that phrase, or maybe even my 3rd finger. It's a little bit more of a stretch. So you can compare those two options and see what works best for you. But the key is to be thinking ahead about your fingering, especially when you're switching positions. Now I'm switching up to position 5, so I'm going to lean in with my pinky. And again I'm switching positions, so now I've got, on the last note of this measure, I've got my 3rd finger on the 7th fret of the 3rd string. And I'm going to use that same finger to play the first note on the next measure, which then automatically gets me into this position of the 7th fret. So now I'm making another slight position shift, and I'm going to do that by placing my index finger on the 8th fret of the 5th string. So there's another shift happening here, and I'm going to use my index finger to make that shift as well. This shift I do with my 3rd finger. Now I'm all the way up into the 12th position. Now if you have a cutaway, you might find it comfortable to do standard fingering, but if you don't have a cutaway, which I don't on this guitar, you might want to change the fingering around a little bit as you get past the 12th fret. So I tend to use my 3rd finger a little bit extra and a little bit less of my 4th finger, because my 4th finger is the one that's being blocked by the body of the guitar here when I get into the 12th position. Now I've got another position shift here, so I'm going to use my 3rd finger, but then stretch back with my index finger. Same thing, 2nd finger stretching back to the 10th fret, allowing me to easily switch positions again. Same thing here, this one's big, I got to put my pinky finger on the 10th fret. Slide back down with my index finger. So let's hear that from measure 9 to where we left off. Now for the second half of measure 18, I'm flipping my picking pattern around again. For the same reason as before, it's just a little bit more ergonomic to do it that way. Now we get to some fun stuff where we can hold down some notes and do some rapid alternation between them. So this is measure 19 and 20. So I do that mostly by holding down the notes I need at the 5th fret so I can quickly alternate between those 5th fret notes and the other fretted notes. I'm using a standard alternate picking pattern. Pretty standard fingering. Stretch. Stretch. And now we're switching to a 4th position. Measure 21 can be a little bit awkward because of all the stretching, so practice it slowly and carefully. Now we're back in the 2nd position for measure 22. Let's take advantage of that open note starting on beat 3 of this measure and teleport our way up to the 8th fret with our pinky. That open string gives you just enough time to reach for that 8th fret note with your pinky, and then we play the rest of that melody going down. Measure 23 and 24 are actually the same. A little bit of a mixture between alternate picking and the other type of picking we did before, where we use the same motion to pick 2 consecutive strings. That's called economy picking. And then measure 25 goes in for the cadence, just a big C major chord. And then we can jump up to a C major bar chord shape here to end it off. Many guitar players have learned that studying these classical etudes for violin is a great way to build fluidity and dexterity for the picking hand. So hopefully you'll have the same experience as well. It's worth lots of patient practice, using the metronome, and always trying to be mindful of which picking pattern you're using at any given time. That's it. Thanks for watching.